Hello, everyone. I hope you are enjoying your evening. Want to welcome you all to Views of the Fifth. Excuse me, Views from the Fifth. It's so new, I messed it up on the first part. Views from the Fifth. We're very excited about this new series that we're doing. We really think it's important to get experts to talk about the issues that we're facing as South Carolinians every single day. And there's nothing more pressing going on right now than that of children going back to schools, teachers going back to schools, staff going back to schools, and we have a great panel tonight to discuss everything that we need to know and be considering as we make these tough decisions to keep people safe, but at the same time, educate the students as they move forward through whatever year of school that they're in. So tonight I have with me Dr. HarrisPastides. It's a great mentor of mine, obviously the former president of the United States of America. That's what I was about to say. The former president of the University of South Carolina. He's an epidemiologist as well, so he does bring two perspectives here from a higher ed perspective as well as public health. We have Sherry East with us, who is the South Carolina Education Association president and high school science teacher as well. So again, double perspectives there. And we have Brian Alston, who is Sumter School District Board member, who also will bring his perspective. So really excited. Welcome to the Views from the Field. How y'all doing tonight?
Good, thank you.
Great. Doing great.
Awesome. I hope y'all are maintaining your health and staying safe. I know it's a trying time. So let's just jump into this conversation, really provide some insight on some of the things on people's mind. And so, like I said, we're going to be discussing COVID. And the first question I have, COVID and the potential long-term changes to higher education. Will federal dollars be needed for colleges and university because the pandemic's impact of enrollment and budget? So we'll throw that first question to you, Dr. Pastides, and love for you to share some insight on that.
Well, look, thank you, Mo. Thanks for having all of us. And this is important. I'm tempted to make light of it and talk about my footballs probably signed by you behind me, but this is a very important topic, frankly. And look, schools needed support even before COVID. My colleagues, esteemed colleagues, might talk about K-12 better than I can, but higher education had gotten a little bit off the rails, too expensive, pushing working class families away from college. That's never a good thing. Mm-hmm. Now, to cope with the pandemic, we don't know yet how many people will matriculate, what percentage. I hope at Carolina it's going to be pretty full, but there are students who are staying home. And so absolutely, but I don't know, whether it's federal and or state government, someone's got to help us make up for the deficit to get us through, just like we're helping other people and other businesses and borrowing money, helping them remain competitive. So I do hope that the federal government is able to do something for higher ed. It's absolutely necessary to get us through this difficult year.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And, can you just shed light on some of the anxiety that people who having to make decisions on higher ed as these students coming from all over, looking at how we're going to go back to school, how we're going to maintain and keep them safe. Can you just shed a little bit of light on what you think those funds need to be going to?
Well, yeah, we are very nervous. I am very nervous because, I love our students and I particularly love our freshmen, but I could tell you they do not feel vulnerable. They do not really feel threatened. They will nod their heads. They will tell you that they do. But when I worry that when the administrators and the residence advisors turn their backs, these young people are going to say, hey, I'm in college. I'm going to do exactly like my big sister, big brother did. I am going to have myself a good time. Let's go out, or let's go listen to music, or let's hang out. Let's get rid of the masks. And so I do worry about that a great deal. At the University of South Carolina, there is a contingency plan for what happens when someone becomes ill in a residence hall, for example. Classrooms, very large classes will not be held as usual. But let me tell you, Mo and friends here, there are 20 million college students in the United States. Half of them go away from their homes to attend college. That is a lot of mobility. And so there are students who are going to be moving all over the country. They're going to be coming together in a new environment that thrives on closeness. So I believe USC has done a fantastic job, and I think they've made the right decision in opening up. But is the SEC going to play football? What's going to be happening here? Are students going to all show up? Are they going to, follow the rules? I certainly hope they do. I'd say I'd hold my breath, but in a COVID pandemic, that's a really bad thing to do. So I'll just cross my fingers.
Okay, well, that's all good information. And one of the things that I kind of want to segue off of that as well is, what about the employment? How are we going to deal with the employment of what big universities brings to any place they're in, but particularly in Columbia, where a lot of the folks who are employed is by the university. Yeah. So whether that's students who are paying for their job having jobs to get through school, or whether there's employees of the university, what's the thoughts there?
Well, the university is on a limited furlough program for those making above a certain amount. There are others who are looking at, worried about keeping their jobs. You have the restaurant tours, the hotels, the football weekends. Mayor Benjamin's and the city council and Richland, Lexington counties are going to be worried about that. Up in the 5th as well, you've got the same things going on. So, the stock market is good. But, this is going to take a long time until we figure out if the economy has landed on its feet. And so, the next few weeks are going to be critical. I believe that by September 15th or September 30th, the latest, we are really going to know if our country and our state are heading out of the pandemic or heading back into it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's unfortunate we're in this position, but we can't look backwards, and doing everything that we can right now to ensure that these young adults, as they go into these university, do get the chance to have that experience of a university, but remaining safe for not only themselves, but their family members and everyone else they touch is key. And happy to get that perspective from you, President Pastides. So want to transition here, Sumter school district plan. Sumter County schools have a very interesting plan for their children. Starting on August 28th, I think, children will start virtually beginning their education. However, school district executive staff will reevaluate this model, I think, on every 2 week, this hybrid model of instruction and actually getting that virtually and being able to come to school and get that education as well. Brian, Sherry, either one of y'all can touch on this, but since we're talking about Sumter specifically, what's your thoughts on how Congress could assist teachers and parents in making sure that schools are safe as we're looking to go back here on August 28th in Sumter?
Well, I will say from a Sumter perspective, whenever a decision is being made, make sure an educator is at the table. These educators, and when I say educators, I'm talking about everyone that's involved in the education process, from your bus drivers, your food service workers, to your building service staff, to include your teachers. These are the individuals that are putting their lives on the line to educate our children and to keep this economy going. And our teachers, our students, and our staffs in our building are not expendable. They are our most precious resources that we have. So I think the first thing that Congress could do is make sure when they're making decisions that they have an educator in the room to be a part of that conversation that can bring that in the building insight to the discussion.
That's fantastic. Sherry, do you have any thoughts there?
I think at the federal level, one of the things that we looked at too is the federal testing waivers that we're hearing that we've applied for one. Teachers are scared to death right now of just life and death situations, their own family situations, child care for their own family. And we really don't need that test score bag hanging over our head right now, worried if we're going to be graded in the spring on what we're doing. We know there's going to be a lot of absences this year. Mm-hmm. They're going to filter in and out based on, the spread of the disease. Are we going to be out or quarantined for 10 days at a time? So that's a lot of instruction that we know we're going to miss just from possible absences. And testing, the high stakes testing doesn't really help anybody with the stress level that's on us right now. So federally, that decision has to be made. So we're hoping that they will approve our waiver. The other part would be funding. We need to make sure that the funding is getting into the hands of the right folks. I mean, 96% of our children in South Carolina go to public schools. Yet we do have a fraction of folks that want to give some of our COVID cares money to our private school sector, and they've already received money. So we need to make sure the money's allocated into where it's needed. Until we don't have a corridor shame anymore, we really shouldn't be allocating any money to any schools that represent the private sector until we're taking care of the public sector. So federally, that's an issue. The funding, I love the Sumter School Board. Yes, teachers need to be at the table. We need to, we built this plane while we were flying it in March. And yes, it was emergency teaching. So I think we'll do a better job with remote learning right now. We need to just make sure everybody's kept safe. Safety of everybody is important.
Right. And we was talking about this a little bit before we got on this call, is that, teachers are very concerned about coming back and their safety. I heard someone say this, and I don't want to misspeak on who told me this, but I thought it was very interesting to hear this descriptive, is that a lot of the teachers are concerned with bringing, well, let me say this. A lot of teachers know that they can potentially take a bullet for a child, given the world that we live in this country, which is unfortunate in itself, and it's a whole nother conversation to have. That being said, a lot of those teachers don't feel like they want to take that bullet back home to their family. That's a personal sacrifice that they're making, but to take that back home to their family, i.e. coronavirus, because a child brings that to them. What are you hearing and what are you feeling for as the teachers making a decision about their own personal careers to come back this school year?
Well, I've actually talked to 3 teachers this week that have resigned. They
wow.
asked for a letter of release from their school boards because of that very thing. They deal with people, one of them they have a husband that's immune compromised and at-risk situation. So they themselves are healthy, but their husband isn't. So they don't feel comfortable being able to teach in the environment because they were not given a virtual assignment. So they applied to go virtual. They didn't get it. So they would have to go back face to face, and they just don't feel comfortable with that. So I think teachers are wrestling with that very much so. And it's funny if you guys bring up football, which has been in the news. We love our football, myself included. But, football players were given an opt-out. Like, you can sit out and get so much money if you don't feel safe. But teachers have been told, oh, you guys are just scared and you're lazy and you don't want to do your job.
Right.
So it's funny how we treat our professional athletes in this country right now versus our teachers who you've been told, oh, well, suck it up, get back to work. You had 3 months off starting in March, which was not the case. Just because the school building closed does not mean the teaching closed or that teachers weren't working. And I guarantee you they've worked all summer trying to figure out what this new plan is going to look like.
Right.
Really, it's scary for them, and they are willing to take a bullet for a child, but they're not willing to take COVID home to their family.
Right. And that makes so much sense. And it's unfortunate that we're in this position. We have the resources in this country to ensure that we can do those safety precautions that we know that's going to work. Where's the funding for PPE, ensuring that everyone has that? And we can do that through the Defense Production Act, really mobilizing that to ensure that our essential workers, whether that is the teachers or students, janitors, or staff, or go into the medical profession or grocery stores, that we have what we need to protect each other. And it's a shame, given that the teachers themselves, who have to pay for their supplies most of the time out of their own pockets, which is alone unacceptable. But then you throw cleaning supplies on top of that, sanitizing and making sure everything is okay, and moving forward from that perspective, that is unfair to them. And, it's a shame that they have to make these decisions right now, given that we're going into the school year and we had time to prepare. So we're definitely thinking about that. And as you said, as we're moving forward, we got to make sure we're knocking out of the park to keep them safe as possible.
Mo, could I jump in one second before you go on to something else?
Absolutely.
You touched on this as well as Sherry. As far as what Congress can do, I think we need more funding for Title I schools. In Sumter, for an example, every one of our schools doesn't have a school nurse, or there's not a social worker in every school because the funding isn't there. Mm-hmm. And dealing with this pandemic, and prior to this pandemic, there was an issue of the social and emotional needs of students. We're going to see that at a larger rate now, that you have students that are in isolated areas in our county that don't have access to broadband. That's something that Congress can tackle. To
Right.
make sure the infrastructure is there, that our teachers are having to choose. Some teachers are having to choose between being home with their families and being safe or coming to a school because they too live in these rural, desolate areas that don't have the broadband infrastructure. We can deploy buses that have Wi-Fi on it, but it does no good if the Wi-Fi doesn't work on that bus because of the infrastructure isn't there. So
Absolutely.
investing in Title I funding for our schools to ensure that they have a school nurse that can identify these students or identify the staff that may be showing signs or symptoms, but also making sure that they have the social and emotional support that they need to be successful. Where our students are not going to learn whether it's virtually in a remote setting or in person if they're having to navigate the already invisible backpacks that they come to school with every day, on top of dealing with the pandemic that they've never had to deal with anything of this magnitude in their lives. So I
Right.
think those are two big issues: is making sure we take care of the social and emotional needs, and as Sherry alluded to, this isn't a social and emotional issue for our teachers as well. They're having to choose between their safety and their family's well-being with their contracts in place. So those are two issues that definitely should be top priorities to any member of Congress.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you're right. And you hear about the mental issues that kids having when, not being able to be around other students, and, the disconnect they have from the friends and emotions that comes along with that. But there is also the other side of that. If you get the coronavirus, take it back home, and a lot of these communities have 3 generations of family in there, whether that's grandmother, mother, child, or grandpa, father, son. That's there. And so what happens when that child goes home, get their grandmother sick, and they have to deal with that emotional anxiety as well? And those are things that you don't hear people talking about. But you segue into the next question, actually, when you start talking about broadband and how we're going to ensure that the infrastructure there. Representative Jim Clyburn has been pushing extremely hard to make sure that all of the United States have Wi-Fi, because essentially it's a utility at this point. And if we haven't learned anything in this pandemic, that is true. If you're going out to Chester, you're going out to Sumter, and you're going into an area where I don't have Wi-Fi as a student, and the way I do my homework in the past was going to the local McDonald's, where you can't go in there right now because everything's socially distant. So you only go through the drive-through, and maybe you can get a Wi-Fi connection in the parking lot if it's not raining. That does not make sense. And we have to get that there. So what can we do? What can we do, Sherry? What are you hearing from the state level? What we can do from a federal level to ensure that this infrastructure is getting to these students?
Well, I think we need to start. If we're going to talk it, they need to walk it. They've been talking about it for a while. Like we had what I call the digital divide, or we had this equity gap in South Carolina for years. I mean, we've had lawsuits about it that say you need to fix the corridor shame, you need to fix the Abbeville court case, but we don't fix it. We just brush it under the table for the next politician to come along, and it never gets fixed.
Right.
So we had teachers that didn't have laptop devices that were driving to the parking lot of their school to do their lessons. I mean, that was in York County where we live, like right there in Rock Hill. Right. There are places that do not have Wi-Fi in York County. And I was kind of shocked about that. I was like, wow, I didn't think York County is rural enough to have dead zones, but there are there. So, I mean, we know it. It's like, that it's there, and you know what you could do to fix it, but yet we still in 2020 don't have broadband for all of South Carolina. It's ridiculous. So they need to put their money where their mouth is and fix it. Even I think that was a big part of the Accelerate ED task force, and even the business world knows, like, we need to get in there with the broadband. And I'm not even sure at that time, if you had the money in hand, if you could have gotten the towers up and the infrastructure built before school started. So here we are. Families are signing up for hotspots. We're equipping our buses. Like you said, we've got families going to McDonald's to try to do work on a phone. Like, we didn't even have devices. And some districts have had to spend their money on devices for the child versus, somewhere like a Greenville or a Rock Hill or Lexington, They are already 1-to-1, and they've been that way for years.
Wow.
So that there's going to be less masks in a Marion County than there is a Rock Hill because of where you've had to spend your money. So
Wow.
we need to equal the playing field for all the South Carolina students. Our infrastructure of our schools, in Rock Hill, Football City, we fight about AstroTurf and stadium lights.
Right.
In other districts, they fight about air conditioning and heat and indoor bathrooms and water fountains.
Right.
And this really shouldn't be the case in South Carolina for any student.
Yeah, I mean, those are fantastic points, and you're absolutely right. And where the federal government can play a vital and pivotal role is to make sure that all virtual education is paid for. And we have the tools to do that. And I'll say it again, it's President can utilize the Defense Production Act. He has the power to put money into private companies. America is greatest when we fought or had crises hit us. The Defense Production Act has played a major role for us to get through that. And so whether that's getting the PPE, like you said, we don't have the max. Well, let's pour that money into these private companies, whether that's a Springs, who's right here in Rock Hill, that can produce these masks. Let's get that money there to ensure that everyone has disposable masks every time they come into the school, that we have hand protection, that we have sanitizing, and that local communities are not having to make the decision of having the tools to make sure that the students are getting educated versus keeping them safe. That's insane when we see so many people getting hurt in this moment. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to send this back to you, Pastides, and I'm going to ask you to put your epidemiologist hat on. Can you speak to how important testing is? Testing for these students as they're coming in to isolate the virus and knowing that they may get sick, or keeping it from everyone else through testing. Can you just elaborate on the importance of getting funding to testing and what that plays in the role, how that plays in keeping these schools safe and open?
Well, sure, it means everything, because unfortunately with COVID, you can infect other people without being ill yourself. So the only way to know if someone is infectious is to test them. And unfortunately, to test them regularly. It's just not enough to have it once a month, and fortunately, the test is not terribly invasive, as everybody knows, does not require blood. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but most people will tolerate it. And, there have been deficiencies in the amounts of tests that are available. And obviously, the frontline healthcare workers need to have access to them, other people who walk into a hospital, a doctor's office. But look, I worry as well, not only about the children and the teachers, but the grocery store workers, the postal delivery people, the other frontline workers. And it's amazing to me to think about the shortages that we have seen over the course of the pandemic. These are not high tech. Now, there are reagents and there are chemicals involved. In fact, most of the holdup is not about the spot sample. It's about the testing in the laboratory and also how long it takes. But certainly every mother, father who's sending their child off in the morning ought to be using a temperature check, ought to keep them home if the temperature is above a certain level. I think they ought to be more conservative than ever about keeping their children home if they've got any of the symptoms, don't feel well. This is not a time to kind of say, well, you go to school, and if you don't well, go see the school nurse.
Right.
And we'll pick you up. We've got to keep our children home, especially for those who are having the face-to-face instruction. The testing is the key. They're not perfect. I'll be the first to tell you they're not 100% sensitive. So there are people without it who can slip, who might be told on one case they had it. We saw that with the governor of Ohio. One moment he had it, the next moment he didn't have it. But I worry about the other one as well, when someone really is infected, but the test is negative. But it's all we have right now. So get more of them and get them out to the schools.
Yeah, that's spot on. And, it's just me and my non-epidemiologist mind. It says if you know where the virus is and the virus lives as it spreads to different hosts, knowing exactly what it is going to help you curve that down. So, testing is vital, and rapid testing, being able not have to wait, a week, 2 weeks to get the test back is also essential to that. And while we're talking to you as well, President Pastides, what ways can higher ed help our K through 12 right now as they're facing some of the issues that Sherry was talking about, for as having tablets and the right equipment to even be able to look at the stuff that they're virtually looking at, or any other thing that you can see where that collaboration can help both institutions?
It's a wonderful question. And, we always try to do that and need to do better. I mean, it ought to be, education is seamless. We talk about K-6, K-12, higher ed. No, education starts early in life and is a lifelong enterprise and endeavor. Look, there's a lot of hardware, especially software is a little different because of licensing, but there's hardware that universities dispose of after a while when they're just a little bit too old, surplus property, if you will. More importantly, there's a lot of expertise, networking expertise, CIO, IT technology, where, we ought to create clusters, the four-year colleges, the technical colleges, and then the K through 12 environment come together. Let's get those CTOs and CIOs together talking about, if someone's got extra capacity over here, let's bring it to the rural school over there. It's not always about government. It always also has to be about ourselves helping each other.
That's fantastic. Sherry, are you seeing some of that among the high school as well?
We tried to, I know in Rock Hill, we have Winthrop, right there in the backyard, and we would try to collaborate with them, especially, the other part of higher ed and schools is the cooperating teachers, our pipeline to our teachers, at the higher education. We're hoping they're producing teachers and getting them. So there's the fear with that. Like if you were supposed to student teach this year, what if you can't complete your program, or how's that look for our college students from higher ed that are in our school systems to help out? So yes, I love to hear the thought, like the surplus things that a lot of times too, we don't connect ourselves with the resources that are out there in the community. We had a lab in Charlotte one time. They were just doing away with all their couple-year chemistry. They had the money to buy brand new test tubes and scales. And we were like kids in a candy store. Yes, take your truck up there and back it up and take everything this company was willing to give us, because for us, it was brand new. So for them, a 2-year-old test tube was like, oh, it's trash. We're like, no, that's like candy here. Right. So I do think we could do a better job connecting our resources to our students. Sometimes it's just kind of like who you know and who you realize has got that going on. But USC has been a great partner for us. In the research department did a teaching during the pandemic survey. And so we partnered with PSTA and the All for SC and the South USC research department to get an in-depth feel for what teachers were going through those few months of teaching during COVID. So we have a lot of research out there that says the number one thing teachers were worried about was the social emotional health of their children. Right. So it wasn't content, it was, are they okay? And that was the problem. And that's still, we don't know if they're okay, because we may not get to see them till, maybe October, hopefully. Right. So just a lot of social emotional stuff going on. That's another thing that we've asked for funding. We've asked for social workers. We've asked for the nurses. We've asked for mental health counselors. I mean, we did that pre-COVID. Right. We knew that was an issue. And it's just bigger now. Like, oh, now all of a sudden you're worried about some missing children. You weren't really worried about them before. I mean, they've always been truant. Like at any given day, you've got more than a 2% absence. But all of a sudden, it's been this eyes on everything that we did wrong during a pandemic. And how do we just fix that and move forward?
Yeah, well, I think you're spot on. And, everything's been exasperated with this COVID. Whether that's education, whether that's our healthcare system, whether that's just how people are getting treated, the wealth gap that we see, all those things has been magnified in this time that we're in under COVID. And I don't want to be all negative here. What? We got about 5 minutes. We'll do our closing statements after this, and I'd love to hear from all y'all. But at this point, what positive things can we take from this exercise? What should we be looking to build from after we expose some of all these gaps that we have now as we look into the school of the future?
Well, we need to come together. First of all, we need to learn from this. Nobody is a bigger fool than he or she who ignores the mistakes of the past. There's probably going to be a COVID something else. I pray it's not going to be a COVID 20. Maybe it's going to be 21. There's going to be another novel virus out there that jumps from animal to human. What have we learned?
Right.
And how have communities pulled together or not?
Right.
I feel hopeful. I think South Carolina, we get batted around a lot, but I've seen a lot of coming together.
Right.
Brian, Sherry, Mo, everyone's going to agree, not perfect. I'll be in on that, but we're good people. Let's learn from this and move forward. Flu season is right around the corner. There's going to be another epidemic sometime down the road. We've got to learn from this, document it, pull together. But if you're asking me about something tangible, get the internet access to every corner of the state, because that's not just about education. That's about health as well. That's about well-being. That's about social development. That's about economic development. Let's get internet access to every rural community in this state, into every household. The people are smart. The families are good. Give them the tools they need to live in the 21st century, and they will surprise you. They will shock you.
Yeah, that was well said. I think we kind of just segue into closing statements after that. That was fantastic, President Pastides. Brian, your thoughts?
I would say that, and it's probably not said enough, our teachers overnight turned into superheroes. From going from in the classroom one day to saying that you're not allowed back in the building the next day, to putting lesson plans into play, to making sure they were on Zoom calls or Google Meets with students, to make sure learning continued overnight, I think goes beyond words of how impressive that is, how our communities came together. We knew about the digital divide prior to COVID, but seeing our churches, our civic organizations come together to open their Wi-Fi so that, like you said, a child that doesn't have access to Wi-Fi could go to a church parking lot and utilize their service, to go to a business. I think those are the positive moments that we came together as a community, that we recognized what was wrong, but we made the most of the moment. And I think that is what is going to prepare us for the start of this school year. We don't know how long this is going to last. Our hope is that it doesn't last through the fall, but if it does, but I think the spring prepared us for this moment. And I couldn't be more proud of the Sumter community, the state of South Carolina, and our country for coming together overnight to address these issues, to make sure that education took place. So that's where I'm at.
Fantastic. That's awesome too, Brian, and you're absolutely right. I have more thoughts on that, but I'll let Sherry.
I think he just sums up everything I would say. He and Dr. Pastides both nailed it. Coming together as one, and I think we saw our education community, not just our teachers, but our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers. They were all making sure that our kids were taken care of. And once we took the barriers of testing out of the way, and we didn't tie people to this scripted curriculum that we've done, we saw some really creative, engaging lessons come forward. Just because it wasn't written down in a program that a district bought didn't mean a student didn't learn.
Right.
Real life learning going on, which is what we've also been begging for. Somebody might have taught a kid how to make a pancake, or they might have taught them how to do a chore, that they were doing math, but they didn't realize they were doing math because it wasn't listed on a standard somewhere. So I think we've had a lot of real life learning that went on during this pandemic, and we need to trust our educators in that they know how to get the job done, and we'll get them caught up when we get back. And to just everybody take it down a notch on the stress level, and just take care of yourself and your own well-being, which I think we've not done a very good job of in the education world.
Right. That just listen to all three of y'all. It's fantastic to get your perspectives on three different levels of education. But it's important that we're having these conversations. Just to add on to what was said about people coming together and finding out solutions to our challenges. And that's what's America is about. Like when these tough challenges come in front of us, we don't sit back. We run to the fight and we find these solutions. So it has been great to see how many people are concerned about their neighbor and helping them get through and, dampen down on these party lines. And I think us as leaders, we got to lead the way on this and understand the severity of the situation that we're in and making sure that we're focusing on the solutions that we're bringing to the everyday folks who depend on government and the collaboration of that with private citizens and private companies to ensure that we're advancing this country and keeping our children safe as they go back to school. We've known about this since March. It doesn't make much sense for us to be in this situation here in August, but we're here. And so all our efforts, everyone needs to be focusing on how we advance this forward. So your efforts on every day to ensure that we're doing the best that we can cannot go understated. Brian, you said it best. We have so many superheroes who have shown their capes in this time, and I think they're going to continue to do that. We all got to continue to do that, and we're going to be successful. So again, thank you for your expertise tonight. Thank you for sharing this great information. We're going to share this out as much as we can. And we're going to keep up to date and keep people up to date with changes as they come because it's going to be fluid. These are three of the best. So thank you all for tonight, for the first show of Views from the Fifth. And we'll keep this thing going. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And we'll sign off.
Thank you much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mo. Take care.
Go Cox.
Go Cox.